Reverie and Interpretation, Thomas H. Ogden, Chapter 5. Dream Associations. As in the discussion of the use of the couch and the fundamental rule in the previous chapter, I shall take as a starting point in thinking about the analysis of dreams the idea that analytic technique must serve the analytic process. I view the analytic process as centrally involving the interplay of conscious and unconscious states of reverie, by in 1962 A.B., of analyst and analyst, leading to the creation of a third subject of analysis, the intersubjective analytic third, Ogden 1994 A.D. Further, that the role of analytic technique in safeguarding the privacy of analyst and analyst is held to be as critical to the facilitation of the analytic process as is the role of analytic technique in creating and preserving conditions for conscious and unconscious communication between analyst and analyst. From the perspective of this conception of the analytic process, I shall in this chapter reconsider aspects of analytic technique related to the analysis of dreams. For almost a century, beginning with Freud's 1900 experience in the analysis of his own dreams, there has been general agreement among psychoanalysts that the analytic understanding of dreams presented in the course of an analysis must be shaped by the network of associations and linkages that the patient generates in response to his dreams. See, for example, Altman 1975, Bonheim 1962, Echegoyen 1991, French, and from 1964, Karma 1966, Gray 1992, Rangel 1987, Siegel 1991, and Sharp 1937. Dreams, particularly the latent content of dreams, have been viewed as the patient's unconscious constructions, and the role of the analyst has been likened to that of the skillful obstetrician delivering a baby as unobtrusively and non-invasively as he can. Lustman 1969, Personal Communication. The analyst must give the patient room to associate as freely as possible to his dream. In the absence of the patient's associations, the analyst is left in the position of interpreting only manifest dream content, thus engaging in a superficial and probably largely inaccurate form of interpretation. Altman 1975, Karma 1966, Greenson 1967, Sharp 1937. Given the importance of the patient's associations to his dream, it is widely held that the analyst must not interfere with the patient's associative process by making premature interpretations based on his own associations to the dream. If the patient does not provide associations, the analyst's role comes to center on exploring the analyst's unconscious anxiety/resistance to providing the associational linkages needed to understand and interpret his dream, including its transference meaning. Gray 1994. The analyst's offering of an interpretation concerning a dream in the absence of the patient's associations, without exploring the patient's anxiety in relation to associating to the dream, would be considered by many, if not most analysts, to be a form of wild analysis. After all, the analyst under such circumstances is simply offering his own associations. If the analyst is to avoid engaging in wild analysis, the patient's unconscious and not that of the analyst must be the focus of the analytic enterprise. What I have thus far presented, in a highly schematic form, as the generally held view of the principles of technique of dream analysis, represents, for me, a fundamental and indispensable component of the understanding of the analysis of dreams. However, in recent years, it has seemed increasingly important to supplement this view with a perspective that places the analysis of dreams in the context of an understanding of the dream as an intersubjective analytic event. In what follows, I shall attempt to explore the implications of the idea that a dream dreamt in the course of an analysis represents a manifestation of the intersubjective analytic third. With this perspective in mind, I shall propose a revised view of aspects of the technique of dream analysis. From the vantage point of the concept of the intersubjective analytic third, the question of dream analysis in general, and the handling of dream associations in particular, becomes an even more interesting and complex endeavor than had previously been generally appreciated. Point 1. One might well ask whether it is any longer self-evident that the patient's associations to his dream should be privileged in the way that they have been in the past in relation to the analyst's conscious responses to the dream. Do we mean the same thing that we did even a decade or two ago when we speak of the patient's dream as his dream? Perhaps, it is more accurate to think of the patient's dream as being generated in the context of an analysis, with its own history, consisting of the interplay of the analyst, the analysand, and the analytic third, and therefore the dream is no longer to be considered simply the patient's dream. In other words, does it any longer make sense to speak of the patient as the dreamer of his dream, or are there always several analytic subjects, dreamers, in dialectical tension, each contributing to every analytic construction, even to a psychic event as seemingly personal, i.e., seemingly a production of the workings of the individual unconscious mind, as a dream or a set of dream associations too? 1. Sakauer, 1938, and Lewin, 1950, were pioneers in the exploration of the analyst's use of his own consciousness as an analytic instrument. Sakauer, 1963, particularly in relation to the use of this function for purposes of understanding the unconscious meanings of the patient's dreams and other sleep-related phenomena. 2. Grotstein, L. 979, and Sandler, 1976, have discussed the interplay of multiple unconscious intrapsychic aspects of the personality system in the process of dreaming a dream and understanding it. However, they do not address the intersubjective dimension of dreaming that is the focus of the current discussion. Blechner, 1995, has discussed the analyst's use of the patient's dreams for purposes of understanding his own unconscious anxieties, which understandings are then used to facilitate understanding of the transference. From the perspective being developed in this and in previous publications, Ogden 1992 AB 1994 ABC, it could be said that when a patient enters analysis, he in a sense loses his mind, in the process of creating a mind of his own. In other words, the psychological space in which his thinking, feeling, bodily experience and dreaming occurs is no longer entirely coincident with his own mind as he had experienced it to that point in his life. From the initial analytic meeting onward, the analysand's personal psychological space, including his dream space, and the analytic space become increasingly convergent and difficult to differentiate. As a patient enters analysis, the analysand's experience of his mind, the locus of his psychological life and to a certain extent, the place where he lives, Winnicott 1971c, and dreams, increasingly becomes located, in a feeling sense, in the space between analyst and analysand, Ogden 1992b. This is a felt place that is by no means restricted to the analyst consulting room. It is a mind, more accurately, a psychosoma, that is in a sense the creation of two people, and yet is the mind/body of an individual. In words borrowed from a poem by Robert Duncan, 1960, it is a place that is not mine, but is a made place/that is mine, it is so near to the heart. As analyst and analysand generate a third subject, the analysand's experience of dreaming is no longer adequately described as being generated in a mental space that is exclusively that of the analysand. A dream created in the course of analysis is a dream arising in the analytic dream space, and might therefore be thought of as a dream of the analytic third. Once again, we must not insist on an answer to the question, is the dream the analysand's dream, the analyst's dream, or the dream of the analytic third? The three must be held in an unresolved tension with one another. As an experience generated in the intersubjective, analytic dream space, a dream dreamt in the course of an analysis could be conceived of as a joint construction, in the asymmetrical sense described in chapters 2 and 4, arising from the interplay of the unconscious of the analyst and the unconscious of the analysand. Since the analyst's associations to the dream experience are drawn from experience in and of the analytic third, they are no less important a source of analytic meaning in relation to the dream than are the patient's associations 3. Just as the dreams of the analysand are generated in the context of the analytic dream space, the analyst's dreams should similarly be treated as sources of analytic meaning in relation to the leading transference-countertransference anxiety at a given juncture of an analysis. Peltz 1996, Whitman et al. 1969, Winnicott 1947, Zweibel 1985. I have found that this is of particular importance when the analyst's dream is recalled during the course of an analytic hour, whether or not the patient is represented in the manifest content of the dream. It is beyond the scope of this discussion to explore and clinically illustrate the analyst's use of his own dreams in the analysis of the transference-countertransference. In the following brief clinical vignette, I will attempt to convey something of an analytic experience in which a patient's dream was treated by the analytic pair as having been generated in the intersubjective analytic dream space. Mr. G was a rather schizoid man in his early 40s whom I had been seeing in analysis for almost 8 years. The patient was extremely well read in a wide range of subjects including psychoanalysis. Mr. G began a session in this period of the analysis by telling me that a dream had awoken him during the night. He had felt quite shaken for some time after waking up. In the dream, his mother was her current age, in her early 70s, and was pregnant. Both she and the patient's older sister were very matter-of-fact about it, behaving as if there were nothing unusual about what was happening. Their behavior and demeanor were so bizarre that the situation felt unreal even in the dream. The patient's mother and sister were busily and excitedly making plans about day-to-day practicalities connected with the pregnancy and the upcoming birth. The patient felt stunned in the dream and angrily told his mother and sister that he couldn't believe what a stupid thing his mother had done and could even less fathom how the two of them could be happy about this thing. He told me that it was agonizingly frustrating in the dream not to be able to find words that had the slightest effect on his mother. As Mr. G was telling me his dream, it was evident how painfully isolated he was feeling in describing what I imagined was his current version of his experience of dreaming of his mother's pregnancy with his younger brother. The patient was 14 months old when his brother was born and consequently was in fact speechless, an infant, at the time of his mother's pregnancy. I imagined that the mother's excitement about and absorption in the pregnancy, birth and infancy of the patient's brother added insult to injury to the patient's sense of outrage at the mother's secret alliance with the father in this completely unexpected event. They had not even consulted him about this important matter. I speculated to myself that Mr. G's father had been banished from the manifest content of the dream and had been replaced by his sister in order to diminish the narcissistic sting of the acknowledgement of generational difference and parental intercourse. The patient seemed to be wearing his heart on his sleeve in the dream in a way that was highly uncharacteristic of this extremely controlled man who was very little able to experience his own feelings. However, the patient had in the course of the previous months of analysis begun for the first time to feel warmth for me and trust in me and had been able to speak about those feelings, albeit in an extremely tentative and oblique way. As Mr. G recounted the dream, I experienced a number of thoughts and feelings including a sense of detachment, reflected in my translating the dream in my mind into early developmental and abstract theoretical terms e.g., generational difference, as well as a mild sense of boredom. I also felt disappointed in myself for not being able to be more touched by a dream that was clearly very significant to Mr. G, and a novel experience for him, in the sense of revealing, in a rather undisguised way, intense, childlike feelings of anger, exclusion, and helplessness. The thought occurred to me that perhaps I had been doing analytic work for too long and was becoming jaded. I rather obsessionally added up in my mind the years I had been in practice in various places and became aware that I had been practicing in my current office for more than 15 years. I looked around my consulting room and was struck by the heaviness of its contents, the ponderous Victorian moldings, the details of which I had perused for years, the singularly unimaginative mantelpiece, the large wooden shutters with the slats glued into place by too many coats of paint. The idea of moving offices had crossed my mind many times over the years, but the thought of it at that moment left me feeling physically exhausted. Mr. G had told me on several occasions that he had felt sorry for his brother whom he felt had never been given a place in the family. However, it was only on experiencing my own indifference to the best that Mr. G had to offer me, in his perfect specimen of an emotionally intense Oedipal dream, that I felt the full impact of what it was that Mr. G had been so vehemently, speechlessly, impotently and futilely protesting in the dream. His protest was not simply the protest of an older sibling rebelling against the idea of having to share his mother with a new baby or against the idea that he was a baby produced by the sexual union and mature emotional and sexual alliance of his parents from which he was excluded and had no voice. What now seemed alive and immediate to me was Mr. G's protest against his mother's and my own indifference to his attempts at combating the way in which I felt lifeless, wooden, dense, immobile in our way of going through the motions of being a mother/analyst. I said to Mr. G that his description of his inability to make himself heard in the dream made me wonder if he had felt that I had seemed dense to him today or in recent meetings. If I had had a more specific sense of, or even a speculation about what the patient might have been responding to, I would have included it in my comment. Mr. G said without a pause, "Nothing has happened out of the ordinary. You've seemed the same as always to me." I said that while he apparently valued my steadiness, he seemed also to be suggesting with his words, "same as always," that he felt that there was something stagnant about what was going on between us. Mr. G said that although he had not planned to talk to me about this until he returned from his week-long summer holiday that was to begin in 10 days, he was thinking about terminating the analysis at the end of the year. I had the strong impulse to muster an argument, disguised as an interpretation, designed to dissuade him from following through with this idea/plan about which I was being given no voice. It occurred to me that it was Mr. G who was pregnant with the secret of the unwanted analysis while I had become the voiceless child. However, this idea seemed formulaic to me and had the effect of obscuring a feeling of embarrassment connected with my impulse to offer a pseudo-interpretation in an effort to hold on to Mr. G. The fantasied plaintive pseudo-interpretation brought to mind a conversation that I had had earlier in the week with a contractor whom I had known for many years and whom I considered a friend. In that encounter with the contractor friend, I had felt unable to understand his state of mind. Over a period of weeks, he had repeatedly failed to make good on promises that he had made to me about work to be done. I had the odd feeling that his words were disconnected from anything outside of themselves, and as a result I began to wonder if I knew who he was. As I ruminatively went over our recent conversation in my mind, I became increasingly anxious. My awareness of the feelings in this reverie led me to suspect that Mr. G was afraid of losing the connection that he had begun to feel with M, and feared that everything would be different between us when he returned. It now seemed to me that Mr. G was attempting to protect himself against such a surprise, and the awareness of his fears, by preparing himself in his mind to leave me, while projecting his helplessness into me. I said to Mr. G that I had the growing sense in listening to him today that he was anxious that something would happen while he was away that would result in his returning to a person he didn't know. I told him I wondered if he were worried that on his return I would feel as unreal to him as his mother had in the dream. I was thinking of his mother's inauthentic attempts to listen to him, reflected in his feelings of unrealness in the dream, as well as my fantasied pseudo-interpretation and my anxiety associated with my doubts and uncertainty concerning the realness of the friendship with the contractor in my reverie. Mr. G was silent for about a minute and then told me that what I had said felt right. He added that he felt both ashamed to be so childish and glad that I knew him as well as I seemed to. There was both warmth and distance in his voice. I was struck by the way in which Mr. G, in the very act of telling me that he appreciated the fact that I understood him, was also conveying, with his words, seemed to, his continued anxiety that I would turn out to be a different person from the one I appear to be. In the course of the succeeding meetings prior to the patient's vacation, it was possible for Mr. G and me to further discuss his fear that the closeness that he had begun to experience with me would disappear without a trace while he was away and that he would return to an analyst whom he did not know and who did not know him. In this brief clinical account, I have attempted to provide a sense of the intersubjective movement that took place in a piece of analytic work involving a dream and associations to it. My reverie began with the detached, abstract, somewhat mechanical translation of the patient's dream in my own mind, accompanied by feelings of boredom. I was disappointed in myself for feeling so detached from a dream that seemed passionate and novel for Mr. G. I do not think that it is possible to say in any meaningful way where Mr. G's dream stopped and where my reveries began. My initial associations were associations both to his dream and to my reveries, which included thoughts about the ponderousness of my office and my own physical stuckness and psychic immobility. My associations/reveries formed an important part of the basis for an interpretation concerning the patient's experience of me as densely impervious to him. The interpretation was made before Mr. G offered formal associations of his own, but it did not feel to me as if I were preempting him or leading him in a direction that reflected my psychology as distinct from his. At the time that I made the initial interpretation, I had only a vague sense of the leading transference-countertransference anxiety. However, the very incomplete interpretation allowed the patient to indirectly, unconsciously, tell me more about his sense of my staleness. You seem the same as always to me. My not being completely deaf to the anger in his comment about my being the same as always allowed Mr. G to tell me of his thoughts about terminating the analysis at the end of the year. On the basis of awareness of my embarrassment about a fantasy/impulse to offer the patient a pseudo-interpretation, reflecting a wish to cling to the patient, and my reverie involving anxiety about the authenticity of the friendship with the contractor, I was able to provide a fuller interpretation. In this interpretation, I addressed what I had come to understand as the leading unconscious transference-countertransference anxiety. The patient's fear of his returning to find that the person that he felt he knew to be me had disappeared and that someone else had taken my place who appeared to be me, but did not feel like me. The clinical vignette just presented represents an effort to illustrate something not only about a way of working with dreams and analysis, but, as importantly, represents an attempt to convey a sense of the type of movement that constitutes the experience of aliveness in the analytic setting. The generative movement between dream and reverie, between reverie and interpretation, between interpretation and experience in and of the analytic third, are for me the heart of that which is unique to the feeling of aliveness of an analytic experience. Some thoughts on facets of the technique of dream analysis. On the basis of the perspective that I have been describing, I have become more inclined to offer an interpretation or ask a question in response to a dream presented by the analysand without waiting for the patient's associations. I find that it is often difficult afterwards to reconstruct in my own mind whether it was the patient or I who first responded to the dream. However, I also find that I usually respond in an unhurried way to a dream presented by the patient, thus giving the patient time to offer comments of his own if he is so inclined. To consistently fail to give the patient time to respond to his dream without interference from the analyst may give rise to a form of transference-countertransference enactment in which the patient serves up dreams to the analyst who ingests and digests them and returns to the patient a narcissistic invention of the analyst in the form of an interpretation. 4. It is important to bear in mind the atemporal nature of dreams and dream associations. Freud 1897, 1915, 1920, 1923b. If the analyst is focused on the associational events following the patient's telling of the dream, he may lose sight of the way in which the patient may have already associated to the dream, for example, in the form of the patient's facial expression on seeing the analyst in the waiting room or in the form of physical sensations or bodily movements occurring during the telling of the dream. Boyer 1988. I have found in my own work and in the work of therapists and analysts whose work I have supervised that the potential for spontaneity and generative thought in the analytic dialogue is significantly enhanced when analyst and analysand are released from, or more accurately, release themselves from and release one another from, the practice of privileging the patient's associations to his dreams, and instead treat the dream as a psychological event that is being generated in the intersubjective analytic dream space. When a dream is viewed as a product of the analytic dream space, analyst and analysand have the freedom to be receptive to the unconscious drift of the analytic third as reflected in their reveries, their experiences of simply listening. Before concluding this portion of the discussion of the relationship of dreams to the analytic third, I would like to briefly comment on the importance of not understanding dreams. Dreaming, or dream life, is a specific form of human experience that cannot be translated into a linear, verbally symbolized narrative without losing touch with the effect created by the dream experience itself, the experience of dreaming as opposed to the meaning of the dream, see Kahn 1976, Pontalis 1977. For this reason, it seems to me particularly apt that the reveries of analyst and analysand serve as a principal psychological and psychosomatic medium through which dream experience is processed in the analytic setting. In the reveries of analyst and analysand, unconscious receptivity that sometimes involves feats of association, Robert Frost, quoted by Pritchard 1991, page 9, might take place in relation to a dream as opposed to thought processes through which a dream is deconstructed, translated, Freud 1913, understood or even interpreted. Dreaming itself is beyond interpretation, Kahn 1976, page 47. In utilizing reverie as a principal form or shape in which dream experience is carried in the analytic setting, the analyst and analysand allow primary process, the drift of the unconscious, as opposed to its decoded message, to serve as a medium in which dream life is experienced in the analytic space and an important component of the context in which dream analysis is conducted. Concluding comments. To return to the beginning, as one inevitably does in analytic thinking and practice, analytic technique must serve the analytic process. I view the analytic process as centrally involving a dialectical interplay of states of reverie of analyst and analysand resulting in the creation of a third analytic subject. It is through the asymmetrical experiencing of the analytic third by analyst and analysand that the drift of the unconscious internal object world of the analysand is understood and, eventually, verbally symbolized. The state of reverie of the analytic pair that is so critical a medium for the creation and experiencing of the analytic third requires conditions of privacy which must be safeguarded by analytic technique. The role of analytic technique in safeguarding the privacy of analyst and analyst is held to be as critical to the facilitation of the analytic process as is the role of analytic technique in creating and preserving conditions for conscious and unconscious communication between analyst and analyst. From the point of view of this understanding of the analytic process, I have attempted in this and the previous chapter to reconceive aspects of analytic technique and practice relating to the use of the couch, the fundamental rule, and the analysis of dreams.